Unfortunately, racism is nothing new to Black, Indigenous, and people of color. It's something we see every day, including in the hiring process. Our names, hair, clothing, and even the communities where we live and work can cause us to experience racism, excluding us from consideration as a top candidate. Most people prefer not to talk about racism, but we're talking about it on this episode of Tip That Scale. We're talking about racism. AJ and I were having a conversation. I tend to have conversations with both of you. Do y'all have conversations without me about stuff?
About you. No.
Okay. Fair enough.
They're good ones about you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Neither one of y'all are looking me in the eye when you say that.
No, they're good.
AJ and I were having a conversation based on his experience, which is why we're talking about racism today and racism in the job search and in the hiring process. We recently talked about ageism. So another ism out there based on our personal experience, and talk about it, and then share some thoughts, some tips for people who are dealing with it. Before we dive into that area, I think it's important for us to identify, let's start with stereotype. And I'm just sharing this from a peer-reviewed paper. Stereotypes are oversimplified generalizations about groups of people. Stereotypes can be based on race, ethnicity, age, gender, sexual orientation, almost any characteristic. That's stereotypes. Now we have prejudice. Prejudice refers to the beliefs, thoughts, feelings, and attitudes someone holds about a group. A prejudice is not based on experience. Instead, it is a prejudgment originating outside of actual experience. Prejudice may be based on a person's political affiliation, sex, gender, social class, age, disability, ability, religion, sexuality, language, nationality, criminal background, wealth, race, ethnicity, or any other personal characteristic. Now, on to discrimination. It says discrimination in this context refers to the arbitrary denial of rights, privileges, and opportunities to members of various groups. So it's very closely linked to prejudice. And then racism. Racism is a form of prejudice that assumes that the members of racial categories have distinctive characteristics and that these differences result in some racial groups being inferior to others. Racism generally includes negative emotional reactions to members of the group, acceptance of negative stereotypes, and racial discrimination against individuals. In most cases, it can lead to violence. The other piece that I've seen is there's a level of power that is associated with racism. So the act is an action. So action, behavior, and talk are part of these various definitions. So I wanted to just share that because a lot of people don't understand those definitions and they throw them out willy-nilly. So AJ, why don't you share with us your experience from the other day and your experience with the ism, without sharing any names, but why we are talking about racism today and racism in the job search and hiring process.
It's not like this is the only time it's happened to me. Like any time throughout my career, I face this. When people are out looking for a job, when people are out doing anything and kind of put that on them, it just makes it another barrier for them to get in, or another barrier makes them feel like they're beneath what they should be. I got requested for an interview. This company here in the city that I live in. Everything was great, going back and forth on email and all this other stuff. And there's a reason why I go by AJ, right? That's not my real name. But I started having to do that from a very early age because people couldn't say my name right. It just sounded weird. They started making fun of my name. So I just made it easier for people to be a little bit more accepted. And that just kind of stuck throughout my adult life and career, and it just kind of stuck as a nickname or what people know me as. This particular recruiter did not even take the time to take a look at my LinkedIn or do any of those things. You can clearly tell because as soon as I got on that call, you remember how we were talking about the bug eyes that happened?
In the ageism episode, yeah.
That's what happened. Within the first 5 minutes, the person didn't even take the opportunity to get to know me, get to understand what my background is, what my personality is. They just kind of said, hey, there's been a mistake and blah, 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 blah. And we don't think you're going to fit the culture here.
Wow.
In the first 5 minutes. And I responded back and I said, well, how do you know I don't fit the culture there? You haven't taken the time to get to know me. You haven't got the time to take a look at my expertise, my experience. And you haven't even gotten the chance to even understand my personality. So what are we talking about? The person ended the call. Didn't say another thing after that. And again, and this isn't the only time I've had to deal with this. This has gone, even if I'm working at an organization, people, I don't know, and I can't identify if it's because of race or whatever else, but organizations would literally not move me up, right? Because there was nobody that was in that role that was like me. And so I moved, went to a different organization. When you start seeing those types of things, you're like, excuse my language, I'm not going to sit around for this.
Well, it's a toxic environment.
It's a toxic environment. And that's why my views on different things like this is just different. It's about hard work. It's about being honest. It's about being ethical. It's being the best version of you so somebody doesn't look at what they may think of as a difference, right? It's very demoralizing when that's the only thing that a person can see, right?
So why do you think that person wouldn't have recognized your last name is undoubtedly India? Why would they not have picked it up off your last name versus, I get the AJ piece, but I just
see, sometimes when you silo yourself into a certain thing, you don't really see that. And my last name, yeah, it's Modi, but at the same time, people that don't have a very broad perspective on the world may not necessarily see that as an Indian last name.
That's a good point. The lack of cultural dexterity and intelligence limits how people see other or think about certain things, whether it's names, especially last names. It's very interesting that you can't make those assumptions based on, names. And when you do, it's very much race driven. We don't have a culturalism. Culturalism is a positive thing. Nationalism, we're not going to say anything about that. But when we talk about it ties to racism, I have a question for you, AJ. Why do you think he said, what stood out to me, he said, this was a mistake, or
this may have
been a mistake. Yeah.
When somebody, yeah.
That's something weird to say. This may have been a mistake. Like what? The timing's wrong?
Generally when a person gets nervous, anything and everything comes out of their mouth. When you make a person nervous, when you make a person very anxious about the current situation, the thought process and sometimes even what they say comes out all weird. It's a very similar situation to your fight or flight mechanism. Sometimes a person's beliefs and sometimes because things happen because of a certain situation they ran through. And I'm not saying it's completely one-sided. And I'm not saying that this person that I was speaking to didn't have a predisposed impression of me, right? But I try to tend to take a look at it and go, well, maybe something happened in their lifetime that caused them to be this way.
Oh, that's kind. That's
well,
kind to say that because I'm opposite. I'll be honest. I'm a little opposite with that. Yeah.
Again, I try to stand by the belief of, look, there was an action that caused this reaction. Am I the person that deserved the reaction? Probably not. But then I'm like, okay, well, what happened to you? This isn't going to go away in our lifetime. But I think people need to be far more mindful of the people that they're employing, especially if they're worried about DE&I and inclusive cultures. When you have the face of your organization, which I am a strong believer that TA is the face of an organization. You can call it marketing, you can call it all these other things, but the very first people that anybody talks to when it comes to your company is your talent acquisition group.
Mhm.
And they are also the people that are showing other people what it's like to be a part of your organization. And if you're putting out information like that and you're creating these dispositions right from the get-go, well, you may need to look at that. Maybe those people should not be in those roles. Maybe those people should not be in a client-facing role. Maybe they should be something so far where they don't even have to talk to other people. But you need to really look at it, unless those are your beliefs too. Don't get me wrong. Even when I was an account manager on the staffing side, and this happened directly, literally during the pandemic, when everything went virtual or we didn't have to have face-to-face meetings, there'd be particular managers that didn't see my face, would be on a call. It tells me that, hey, I don't know. I know I can't say this into my company, but I know that I can say this to you. Can you look for someone that's like me?
Yeah, I've heard that tons of times.
See, and you hear that, and you're kind of like, well, what do you mean? Like, I don't know how to find someone that's like you because I don't necessarily know you personally. But what are you talking about? Well, I don't want anybody that came from across the pond. So,
What pond? I'd be like, what pond? The pond in my backyard? Because my neighbor would be ideal for this position. But I'm snarky like that works for me.
Yeah, I mean, and so when I would hear those things, I would do one of two things. I'd be like, all right, I'm going to take your money. Or I would hand that account off to somebody else because, like, I just wouldn't deal with it.
Okay, so you often will play devil's advocate. I normally don't like to say it, but I'm gonna say it in this.
You're killing.
I do.
But I'm gonna say it in this instance that I'm gonna play devil's advocate for a second. In dealing with, you said take the money or pass it off. And to me, that's problematic on both sides because what it doesn't do, it does not address the issue of racism, and that's what that person is saying. That's the reason I said we need to push people to that uncomfortable position so they know. Believe me, I know it can be tricky because there's a business side of it as well, but from my standpoint, I know I don't want to work with any racists. Have I in the past? Yes, I have, which informs me today that I don't want to work with racists. First of all, I've been in the skin for a long time.
Yep.
I did not have the choice. And I think this is what's really important where racism is concerned and why we need to call it out. That's the reason when you were telling me the story, I was like, what company is it? Not that I'm going to go fight the company, but I see an opportunity for training because ultimately what we know is, just like we talked about in the ageism episode, racism, whether it's with an employee already in the workforce or even in the job search and hiring process, it is against the law. This is why companies firing these people who are doing racist acts toward other people on their own time, because they aren't necessarily on their own time. They are a representative of that company. They may be on their own time, but they're still representing that company, and they don't want to be associated with those actions because, Ron, you said it in the last episode, it can cost a ton of money.
Well, I mean, it's just like, and that's the thing is these professional sports teams, when they have someone who goes out and someone or beats or does something that's just illegal, immoral, things like that, they divorce themselves from them, right? Because, like you said, they're still a part of the team, a representation of that team. And if they accept it, or if they let them get by with it, it means they accept it. So
Yeah.
same thing.
The other question I have for you, AJ, why do you feel you have to prove yourself? Or do you feel you have to prove yourself? And is that rooted in your race and cultural background? Or do you feel there are other reasons why you had to?
I don't want to say in my race, but I will say in my culture, it's not about proving ourselves. It's about just working hard and being the best version of yourself. My entire life, I mean, I grew up in a very small town. And when I mean small, there was the entire population of the town was maybe like 1,500 people. Literally 20 minutes away, we had a major base for the KKK. Like we would see the hoods driving up and down our town and stuff like that. My entire life, I've been told I was different. And to combat against those differences, I work hard to show people that I can do what I can do. It's because that I want to show that I am just as capable. I'm not beneath you. I'm not anything like that. I am just as capable. And in that, it's given me the opportunity to grow, both professionally and personally. It's changed my mindset and things. There was a time when things like that would have made me very angry, extremely angry to the point where I wanted to lash out and things like that. But now I've taken a stance back and, really try to understand what exactly just happened and why the situation occurred. They're never like completely right in your face. I think it's just ingrained in people to lash out at people that are different than them. Right?
Hurt people hurt people. So we'll
Yeah.
say that. But I'll also
And racism isn't unilateral, right? There's no barriers on who can be racist, right? So
No.
well again,
But like I said,
remember I said that it is also very much tied to power, the power and who has the power and influence.
right.
A lot of people say some crappy stuff, but when it's the actions that you take to actually harm, or the physical actions. I went back and forth with someone online thing, and I could tell he was not happy with my comments. I call someone a racist. They were mad. You want to make a racist mad? Call them a racist. I tried to be very smart about my responses, which I try to be often. And I said, okay, well, if you aren't a racist, I apologize for calling you a racist. However, your actions and behaviors are those of racists, and therefore, that's why I call you a racist. And then he left me alone. One of the things that I believe in, and the reason I asked the question about why do you feel you have to prove, because that is something that so often when we're dealing with racism, we try to counter racism by doing more, by going above and beyond, and still not getting the same response or the same outcomes that we want, because we have to understand that it is racist behavior that's blocking us. So the more we try to prove, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get anything in return. It's one of the things that within the Black community we've had within our community for years, and that's the saying that we have to work twice as hard to get half as much.
so I want just the Indian community.
Mm-hmm.
I want everybody to think about it. There's a reason why that specific group of people are in high paying jobs, and they're in jobs that they cannot be challenged to say that you're not good enough. Tech industry, doctors. Why? Because they know that they're going to be needed regardless of what they are. Even then, like you, they still face these types of prejudice. And I'm not just talking about because they're my type of people or whatever. Even, people of the Asian communities and all these other different places, there's a stigma that's attached to them.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, they smell like curry. I don't want them in here. They smell like coconut oil, blah, 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 blah. Well, it's a bunch of bullshit. Okay, well, maybe that person doesn't like the cologne that you smash on your face every freaking 5 minutes, and you walk around with smell like potpourri. I want to be very careful here to say that this has not happened throughout my entire life, but it has happened. And there's people that have faced this. I've faced challenges. I've learned to overcome them. I've learned to ignore them. I've learned to do all of these different things, and I try to look at the best in people. But yeah, I mean, things are very evident, and they become very clear when certain things are being said or positioned in a certain way.
One of the things I'll say is, and we did say it in our ageism episode, is anyone who's facing an ism, we know that it's an ism. We know when we're facing ageism, sexism, racism, we know it because we have the experience. And it shows up very much in the same way. Anytime an interview, like you were saying, ends within 10 minutes, it has nothing to do with my qualifications. Anything between 5 and 10 minutes, and I've never gotten this may have been a mistake. I've never had that, but I can always tell when it's race related. You can tell. It's as much as I know where to find the seasoning in my spice cabinet, I can tell because it shows up very similar or there are very similar nuances. So when we're talking about racism, especially in job searches and hiring practices and the hiring process, it affects candidates and job seekers as well as employers. Like you were saying, and we were saying, it does not look good if anyone on your recruiting, your TA team has any type of biases and are racist. Sometimes they think that it's just a bias until they're in the act and what they're doing is racist versus just bias. So from a candidate standpoint, what do you think candidates should do in preparing and in their job search so they can limit experiencing racism in the job search?
Unfortunately, there isn't really much you can do about it because that's not something you have a control over. The other person does. There's actions you can take once it happens. I mean, you can choose to accept the fact that, they consider you as someone that's different. And then ask yourself the question, is that somewhere I really want to be? Or
I don't think it's that they consider you something different. I think
Thank
it's
you.
your difference is bad, right? That's
Thank
the
you.
piece of
Thank you.
that's a problem.
Thank you.
exactly. And so when you deal with these types of things, it's up to you to decide, do you want to subjugate yourself or do you want to subject yourself to that type of environment? Because if the person that you're initially talking to for the company is doing these things, how many other times have they done this? And how long have these people been there for this type of thing to continue? And that also it's a big reflection on the leadership that's over there as well, because how could they not know?
So that's the question though, right? Does it stop right there, or is it pushed down to that person? Is it something they see inside there, or is it solely held by that person and they have the power to keep people out the front door? So that's probably worth going and looking on Glassdoor and see if you've heard anybody else say anything about that. One, like you said, how long has that person been there? If they've been there for a long time, then it's probably bigger than just that person if it hasn't been either reported or it's still accepted by now. But if they're relatively new, it may have just not made its way up. That would be worth finding out. Calling someone above that person saying, hey, here's my experience, just curious. Is this something that is corporate wide? That's just weird. I mean, I when you said that, I thought that is so weird to hear something like that now, especially with all the awareness that's put out there, especially as it ties back to the HR field, recruiting, things like that someone would still, even if they thought it, say it in an environment like that. That's scary.
Well, I mean, that's why I like to ask, what does DE&I mean to you? Because everybody has a different interpretation on what it's supposed to be, but what does it mean to you?
I'm so afraid that, and I think it's already happening, DE&I was having a path to success. It was growing, it was being recognized, it was being put into place at companies, if for nothing else, a public view, right? To look good publicly. Yeah. But now I think so much has, with all these layoffs, that's just an easy target now to shut it down. We can't afford to put the money in it, and it's a setback, right? It's going to be a kick up and start all over. It's unfortunate because it was starting to grow and the awareness was starting to be there. And like I said, if for nothing else alone, companies were putting it in there to make them look good publicly, but at least there's a foot in the door to start growing and showing the value of it. But I think this is just going to be a setback, unfortunately.
No, I mean, I've seen organizations that are specifically looking for DE&I advocates, managers for DE&I, and all this other
I've
stuff.
seen them, but I don't see as many as I did before all the layoffs
Yeah.
started, right? It's just like recruiting, right? There's a big cutback in those types of roles.
And
Well, it's very easy to
many are,
excuse because it's
no,
not revenue generating.
what were you saying? Say that again, AJ?
I say it's very easy for organizations to excuse those roles because they're
Yeah.
not revenue generating roles.
Yep. Yep.
It's not imperative to the operation of our organization. It's not imperative to get the platform out, the software out. So it's very easy for them to cut it.
Many companies are, instead of having those roles as a part of the organization, many of those roles are now moving to a consultative approach. Thankfully, they do recognize, for some of those companies, they do recognize that it's still an important and necessary initiative that they must keep going even during layoffs and this market downturns. They moved it to consulting, and I know that because a couple have reached out and we've talked about it. That's one thing. There are some companies that it will definitely be a setback. When we're talking about DE&I, and AJ, you were saying, what does it mean? And it means different things to different people and how it's the approach. It's the outcome and the results should still be the same. And that's ensuring that any organization is open to diversity, is open, not just open to diversity, but being inclusive of that diversity, and then also providing an equitable stake across the board for everyone. It's not always that everybody has to get the same, because of course that's based on experience, something we talked about in the pay episode, but that there is an equitable approach to pay and opportunities within an organization. That's the crux of it. Do all of them do that? No, absolutely not. There are some, they talk the talk, they wanted that just so they can look good. There are other ones that they want it because maybe they were planning on going public, and that's a requirement from the investor. I don't know. Then for others, there are some organizations that are totally and completely dedicated to ensuring that DEI results are prevalent and that it's talked about amongst everybody within the organization, regardless of what group they are a part of. And that makes a difference. Let me ask you this, and I think, Ron, I'm going to go to you for this question. This is going to be a doozy. Say, for instance, you're advising AJ, and he tells you this has happened. What would you suggest AJ do as a candidate with this particular company? How would you suggest that he move forward, or what he should do?
I would advise, one, and probably would have been good on the front end, go to Glassdoor, look and see, do you see another mention of something like this on there? Is it a history with this company, with this individual potentially? I would definitely look and see at that individual's LinkedIn page and see how long they've been there. They've been there for a long time. It's probably an accepted practice that's known. I don't know how, if that had been going on for a long time, comments like that somebody would not have made a call into upper management and said, are you aware? Do you know this is going on? And if not, if the person's been there for a long time, if they haven't been there for a long time, it's probably a one-off. It's still, either way, I think it deserves a call into upper management to make them aware, find out what their perspective or take is on it, and reaffirm. I mean, it's going to be looked at one or two ways, right?
Mhm.
It'll be acknowledged and appreciated that you called in, and if they truly care about the reputation of their company, they're going to do something about it. If it's true and they don't care, they're obviously not going to do anything about it. And you know where it landed, and it wasn't something that was lost in translation, or there was a better explanation than what you felt. I wouldn't leave it without making a call, because those things will just propagate and become bigger and bigger and bigger if they're not called out and brought to the light.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when you've seen it happen a lot, it just kind of becomes like, all right, what's the point? It's just a waste of my time. That's how I look at it at this point.
Yeah, but it's
I've seen
taking
it
the
since I was a
time.
kid.
look at your time that it's taking already and eating away at you and making you hate and wonder. It's a phone call to me. There's got to be some level of satisfaction that, hey, I let these, if it were my company and that were going on and I didn't know about it, then I would really be appreciative that someone let me know and I could make adjustments and changes. So there's a level of satisfaction in keeping others from doing it and letting it be known this is just not acceptable. You know you're not going there, so you don't have a worry about burning the bridge, or it may be hopefully it would be looked at in a great way, and the owners or the next level up would say, let us take care of that issue. Let's move on to the interview and have a conversation. So I don't know. It's a level of satisfaction to where it stops eating at you and you're wondering, and I wouldn't leave it there. That would be my advice. You don't know, is that person's who you spoke with own biases what created that quick phone call? Is it that person knows that, oh, management doesn't like people that look like you, I got to end this, right? You don't know where it lands, and it would be a great thing to know. But that's the thing.
I mean, again, I don't even classify myself as Indian or American.
From Indian descent, right? From
yeah.
It's a bias that you feel was built in when the person saw your physical being. When they saw you, that's when it happened.
I agree with you, Ron. I believe that a lot of people in leadership positions, manager positions, they don't know. It's something that should be brought to the forefront. We've already said before that the larger consequences, say for instance, for this particular company, if they did that to someone else, they'll be facing a lawsuit. Let's just say they don't pay the candidate anything or there are no consequences. The bad press alone is detrimental to a company. And y'all know, here I am, I haven't said it in a while, but to the corporate brand as well as the employer brand. It's going to be an issue. It's not necessarily responding and sharing your experience in a way that is, do you know that this recruiter did? No. It's more of, hey there, Mr. VP, Miss CHRO. I recently had an interview with this person. While the interview was 5 minutes long, based on my experience, this is very much indicative of a racist response, or however you want to position it, because I guarantee more than likely they don't know, or if it's one incident that has been put on Glassdoor, but it should be brought to that person's attention. Going back to what you said, AJ, earlier, we were talking about how, differences and we should all be treated equally. But it's hard to make that happen if you don't talk about it. You have to be able to at least say something for someone to address the larger issue, or else it becomes constant, which leads to systemic racism. If it continues to happen, then it becomes that institution that becomes viewed as racist when it started with one person. But how do we have ownership as individuals of what changes we want to see and make in the world?
I don't know if we're going to see all the changes that we need to see in our specific lifetime, but there are the new generations that are coming up. They're more accepting of these differences.
Well, so many of them are byproducts of the differences, right? Which is a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I believe that understanding different cultures and different aspects and different thought processes it's a wonderful thing. It helps you grow as a human being. It opens up your ability.
I get what you're saying, and you've said it a couple of times that we're not going to see these changes in our lifetime. We're not going to see sweeping changes in our lifetime. No. I agree with that. However, I want to see some.
Well, it's incremental change, incremental growth, right? Everything that's done results in change.
So now, no, go ahead.
There have been incremental changes, and I have. I've always worked for organizations or tried to go to organizations that were far more accepting of this. But even then, there is a little bit of bias that's formed. When you look up and all you see is a certain demographic leading a whole group of people and you don't see anybody of anything else.
But we also know bias is different from racism. You go to a website and the entire leadership team reflects one demographic. that could be very much based on bias. But if we learn that there were 6 people of Asian descent or 3 Black Americans or Indian Americans who applied to be a leader and they were actually blocked for whatever reason, then we need to consider, was that bias or is that racism? This is where I'm a true advocate for making people uncomfortable. It comes down to, we do not learn in our comfort. We learn when we are uncomfortable. And that's where change can happen, because a lot of people aren't even aware that they're doing that until they are made aware of it, which that also is why D&I can be a beneficial initiative within a company to identify these and help support change in that area.
So again, here's my belief on that. Like, I can fight fire by fire, or I can put it out with water. And what I mean by that is, if I can show them that I am not what they think I am.
Wait, hold on. Don't go any further.
Okay.
What do they think you are? This goes back. We need to be very clear about what we're saying. What do they think you are?
That's the thing, though. You're not gonna know until you take the time to understand it.
Right. Yes, you are of Indian descent. You are an American. So if that was the only thing that they saw, where does this change come? This is what goes back to that question that I was asking about proving yourself. The thing about it is, there are some places that we recognize, I'm not going to change their mind. Forget them. I was going to say another word, but forget them and move on. What's really important is we be clear about what's happening and how we can make a difference in it for not just ourselves and our own job searches, but as we consult with other people who may be experiencing it, as we lead teams that need to learn and need to be taught, are these some of the things that you're doing? And sometimes we can hear that in conversations that aren't necessarily work related. Those are those happy hour conversations that come up. Ooh, ding, 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 something's not right here. This is not good. So not just as job seekers, but as leaders, and based on the roles that we have within the organization, whether as a consultant on the TA team, as coaches, we have a responsibility to be able to address it wherever it is, so we can make the change and realize that people don't have to prove themselves. I can't prove to you that I'm an incredible career coach or employer branding professional or professional around internal communications. If all you see is a Black woman, then that's on you. However, if that's all you see and you're not going to give me the time to learn about my experience, then I am going to take some time and I am going to talk to and let someone know within that organization that this was my experience. It's okay that I didn't get the job, but I want you to know that this was my experience and this is what I took from it. And I do feel that this could be definitely a racist encounter. So you should know this, whomever is at that upper level position, because it makes your company look bad.
Makes sense. Here's the other thing, though. Like, in my beliefs, if I take any action that will hinder another person's livelihood, their well-being, that's a bigger sin on me than what they did to me. Because at the end of the day, I'm doing literally the same thing that they're trying to do to me. I'm keeping them from their livelihood.
But what if you're keeping that owner from their livelihood by allowing somebody like that to stay there as well?
That is true. I mean, those are the types of things that you constantly go back and forth on. Like, do I take action? Do I not take action? Is it worth it? Is it not worth it? Am I doing it because I'm angry, or am I very level-headed about this? Which is just, I look at scenarios like this. I don't want to necessarily be a direct cause. Now, granted, their actions would be a reaction for me, but how does that make me any better than them?
Okay, I'm gonna put you on the hot seat now, like I haven't
Okay.
already. Like I haven't.
Yeah, go for it.
What if you're the leader? What if you are, and how does this affect you as a leader? How would you deal with someone who is, you learn
They're
that
on my
is-
team.
yeah, because you would
So I think
be keeping them from a livelihood.
no. So here's the thing, it's a difference. I'm coming in from the outside. I am basically the foreign entity coming into your thing, telling you how to do things. It's one thing. One, that's a big no-no. Now, if you're on my team, you do something that's going to harm the organization or the person on the team, you're not going to be on there. If you're unaccepting of another person's work, or if you're unaccepting of another person just because of their ethnic background, their beliefs, whatever it is, I don't tolerate it.
This is two people coming to the table with different approaches. And from my leadership background, this is why I would let the company know that this is an issue, because I'm a leader and I want them to know that this is something that they need to be aware of and needs to be changed. The action that they take with it is on them. But me bringing it to the table is bringing awareness that they may not know.
And you're
Uh-huh.
preventing it from continuing to happen. It allows that action to continue to happen to others and be accepted, and it probably grows. And when you get away with it once, people tend to try it even more and even harder. So
Yeah.
it's
It's
just
it's
See, this happens.
that one bad apple scenario. People like, oh, it's just one bad apple. But if it's in a bowl with other apples, it's gonna contaminate the other apple.
right.
And we
And
don't
what if that person becomes the leader? What if that person, they don't fill that role, that person becomes the leader, then that really propagates. If that person in it is indeed the one driving that action, and
right.
it's not being pushed down from the
Yeah.
top.
Well, let's talk about it from this perspective, because I asked the question, what does DE&I mean?
Mhm.
Like you said before, there are organizations, and I think it was Ron that you said it, but there are organizations out there that are just doing it for visibility purposes.
Check the box, yeah.
And they're doing it because they realize, oh, we got a big number of this certain demographic, but we don't have this demographic, and we need to even out the playing field. See, that in itself is a problem, because you're putting importance again on the demographic and not the skill.
I'm sure that there are organizations that look at that. The problem is the immediate belief that other people that are from different races don't have the skill or they don't have the goods. That's the problem. So it's not about hiring for race. Oh, well, we need these numbers. That's not the case. Yeah, skill is very important. The problem is when you think that other people don't have the skill and they're automatically discounted. You could have been automatically discounted. I could have been automatically discounted in that moment because thinking, oh, well, she's Black. She wouldn't be a leader. She doesn't have this experience, even though the resume says something different. But then they may think that I'm lying on the resume, or better yet, you're not a culture fit. Well, baby, I would say, do you even know what, first of all, I ask this question often, do you even know what culture is? Because a lot of people talk about culture and they have no idea what their organizational culture is. We know that recruiting teams are limited during this current downturn. How can companies make sure that their teams are not putting people forward that are racist in this critical role that is representative of your company?
It starts from the top. The leadership needs to know who their teams are. They need to understand what their teams are about. They need to understand the individuals on their teams. How do you do that? You get to know your teams. And once you do that, you get to understand their beliefs, you get to understand what's happening, and then you can make proper decisions based on that.
What about you, Ron? What do you think?
I mean, I think if you've got a recruiter who is, I don't know, exhibiting racist or biased hiring practices, I think a lot of times they're not going to admit it, right? I mean, it's not something that somebody even admits to themselves. Sometimes they may be unaware of those biases. Sometimes they may be. I think you can look at, people collect data for a reason, right? And you can identify those biases within the actions of that person, right? If this person only puts forward candidates of a certain color, race, religion, what have you, there may be some either unknown or known biases that that person has. And it's worth having a conversation once you get enough data to see. I mean, I think that's something that you can't hide. And then you have to look at the situation, right? Are there just no people of applying for those types of roles that come from a different, whatever the makeup is? Probably not, but you can look at all of that and see. I mean, the information's collected. And it may just be making the person aware. Hey, are you aware that you only submit over people from X background?
Right.
Is there a reason?
Mm-hmm.
You may be missing out on some good options and candidates. I just think a lot of times it's unconscious.
We each make a choice in how we respond to racism. As we're talking about this, for other job seekers, candidates who are in the job market, they're job searching, they're job shopping. And I would say it's probably is more of a job shop. It is doing a little bit more research on the recruiter you're talking to, if you have access to it, learning more about the leaders. What have they said? Because we've seen it now, y'all, that you go back into some social media, some old tweets, and boom, oh my gosh, what? And people say, oh, well, you know, that happened 5 years ago, that happened 10 years ago. My question is, what's changed? What has changed from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when that leader, that person, that whatever, posted something on a social media site or Facebook or whatever? What's changed? And how has it been demonstrated that they've changed? That's the real key. Real change comes with the actions. That's when it's believable. And it's not just one action, it's an ongoing, constant action.
Well, I think one of the ways that people could see and understand what it feels like is to get outside of your bubble and go to different places. Just be good people. There's no reason for you to say, hey, you're different, I'm different. Like, just accept people for who they are.
But
So
you know
granted, yeah,
what?
sometimes you can't.
But the problem, even with being good people, is people have an idea of what good is, a different idea of what good is, a different idea of what right is. It really is about
Accepting is the big key.
accepting people and acknowledging their humanity. That's what it comes down to. There's a lot of nuances about race, especially race in the workplace, and even how we get into the workplace. What would you do, or have you done, if you experienced racism in your job search or in an interview? You heard two approaches from our conversation. Which one feels right for you? Or is it based on the company and situation? Thanks for joining us as we discuss this often difficult topic, but one that's necessary to address. Be sure to rate Tip That Scale and follow and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes.